Our ability to focus and our ability to control our focus are distinct but closely related skills that develop quickly during infancy and continue to develop for many years. Infants are pretty good at crying, and the mothers of infants are usually very good at interpreting what each cry means. I'm hungry, I need a new diaper, I'm gassy, I need a nap, and so on. But if you find that your infant isn't crying enough, here's another way to make them cry. Hold up a checkerboard in front of them. Newborns aren't very good at recognizing colors or shades of gray, so they tend to look longer at high contrast objects, and you can't get much higher contrast than the black and white pattern on a checkerboard. Infants of a certain age focus so intently on a checkerboard that sometimes they literally can't look away, and this can be distressing for them, and so they'll start to cry if you hold the checkerboard up for too long. Now obviously you wouldn't actually try this cruel little parlor trick on an actual newborn, but this fun fact points to an important insight about human concentration, that our ability to focus and our ability to control our focus are distinct skills. A DSLR camera can be set to autofocus so that the user can just look around and shoot, or the user can control the focus to get more precise shots. And our minds are similar. Sometimes we go about our day or go through a competition with our autofocus on. That is, we don't think about what we're focusing on, and we don't think about what we should be focusing on. But focus is something that people are able to control, even though our abilities to control our focus vary greatly. An ADHD diagnosis does not mean that a child is unable to focus or concentrate. It means that a child is unable to control their focus as well as a non-ADHD kid. In fact, some kids diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can get so hyper-focused on a task, particularly a fast-paced task like playing soccer or video games, that they don't perceive someone who is trying to get their attention. So ADHD is not the inability to focus. Our abilities to focus and, when necessary, to control our focus are essential to sport performance. As Bob Rotella wrote, a loss of focus on 4 or 5 shots around makes the difference between great golf and mediocre golf. In a sport like golf, the golfer needs to focus on making good club selections and strategic decisions before playing each shot. And the golfer needs to shift their concentration and focus deeply on their target while they swing the club. But between shots, there are times when golfers can and should come out of this deep focus. It's almost humanly impossible to maintain deep focus for the entirety of the several hours it takes to play 18 holes. So golf, though slow-paced to the observer, requires several dozen episodes of sprint focus from participants who wish to perform well. Pitching is somewhat similar. A starting pitcher needs to get deeply focused before each pitch, but they only have to do this for a few seconds at a time, maybe 150 times throughout a game, including warm-up pitches. When golfers and baseball players are having difficulty with focus, it often stems from the fact that they are operating under the mistaken belief that they need to be deeply focused for 3 or 4 hours, not realizing this is unnecessary and possibly impossible. Most of the athletes I've talked to personally try and stay deeply focused simply because they've never thought of doing things a different way. Their coaches tell them to focus or to concentrate, but they usually don't tell them how to focus or when to concentrate. Boxing is a little different, and boxers need to focus differently. Think of it as middle distance focus. Boxers need to focus in a series of 3-minute bouts, no pun intended. And if a boxer loses focus during one of their 3-minute rounds, they will probably get prompt feedback from their opponent. I've heard that experienced boxers can read the eyes and body movements of their opponents to detect when their focus has drifted. So these subtle cues are like blood to a shark. Proper focus for distance runners depends on the goals of the runner and the runner's ability. Sports psychology researchers who focus on distance sports have identified two different attentional strategies: association and dissociation. Association involves monitoring bodily functions such as breathing, heart rate, and muscle tension. Dissociation involves thinking about literally anything but these feelings. Some runners will dissociate by listening to music, and billions of dollars are spent each year on music players specifically designed for runners and exercisers who want to dissociate. Some runners run not because they enjoy running, but because they feel that they ought to run due to the well-known benefits associated with exercise. So dissociation helps them complete a task that they're not particularly excited about. Yes, they may feel a sense of accomplishment at the end of the run, or even a runner's high once they're finished. But the process is a bit dreary, so an upbeat playlist can get their feet moving. So novice runners, for whom success means getting themselves to run longer and longer distances, often perform best when they dissociate. Because tuning out feelings of heaviness in your thighs or excruciating pain in your shins can help us novices finish our runs. And that may be why some 10Ks and marathons have banned the use of MP3 players during races, because they can provide an advantage. I helped my friend Matt analyze data that he collected from marathon runners, and one who wasn't allowed to wear an MP3 player during his race said that he tried to sing the entire Beatles catalog in his head throughout the 26.2 miles. But many of the participants in the study had no attentional strategies, not even dissociation, to fall back on as they tried to avoid hitting the wall. Elite runners, however, are often very, very good at controlling their attention. And elite runners tend to associate far more than they dissociate. As the pace of a race increases, middle and long distance runners tend to focus even more acutely on monitoring their pace, their breathing, their heart rate, and muscle tension. When I lived in Minnesota, my dentist was an extraordinarily talented woman named Janice Klecker, who ran the marathon for the United States Olympic team during the 1992 Games in Barcelona. This was the same games, by the way, that the original Dream Team competed at. Dr. Klecker is as patient and kind as she is humble and talented. So during each visit, I would try and sneak in as many sports psychology questions as I could. And when I asked her about association and dissociation, she was emphatic that in a marathon, there is no time to dissociate, which surprised me since 2.5 hours seems like a really long time to run. But she said that during each marathon, she stayed completely focused on her pace, her breathing, her heart rate, and her position relative to other runners. And as an elite athlete, her focus wasn't just drifting to these things. She was able to run at an elite level, in part because she had learned to control her focus. Like a DSLR camera, our focus can function on autofocus without our conscious control, or we can adjust the lens to control what we focus on. Some things like car wrecks attract our attention to the extent that it is literally hard to look away. But being able to control our focus allows us to look at the road ahead and avoid causing a second traffic accident. Likewise, I'm sure some golfers and pitchers and boxers and runners can do quite well despite not having ever thought about what they focus on while competing, or never being intentional in deciding when they need to concentrate and focus deeply, and when they need to give it a rest. They just focus on what they naturally focus on, and they do fairly well most of the time. But you won't find many of these people on the PGA Tour. Most of the top players in the world have a swing coach that helps them continually groove their swing, and a sports psychologist who helps them with the mental side of the game. In my opinion, deciding what to focus on, how to get focused properly, and knowing when to start the pre-performance routine that gets them focused may be the most essential components of an effective mental game. The ability to not only focus, but to control focus is critical to human performance, regardless of whether the athlete engages in sprint focus like a golfer, middle distance focus like a boxer, or marathon focus like, well, a marathon runner. The reason many athletes aren't in control of their focus isn't because they have not yet developed this ability or because of an ADHD diagnosis, but simply because they have never really thought about what they need to focus on, when they need to focus on it, or how to get themselves focused properly. So athletes and coaches really need to ask themselves the questions and think about what proper focus looks like in their sport. Once they ask the questions, they might find that the answers are fairly obvious. And if they don't, there's always people like me who can help them find the answers. When athletes are able to concentrate their focus in the right directions and let their training take over, they are much more likely to perform near the upper limit of their potential, rather than act like a newborn in front of a checkerboard.